Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Pat McCormick, president of the City Club, and I'd like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who are joining us here today in the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we will discuss what policies protect rights of gun owners and keep our communities safe. Moderating today's program between Penny Okamoto from Ceasefire, Oregon, and Kevin Starrett from Oregon Firearms Federation is Jack Roberts, Executive Director of Lane Metro Partnership. But first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures that we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and our Friday Forum winter corporate sponsors, Bank of the Cascades, CenturyLink, Miller Nash, Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield, and The Standard. We're grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. Join us next week at 11:50 a.m., a little earlier than usual, for our Think Out Loud with Governor John Kitzhaber. You can learn more about City Club events and purchase tickets on our website, pdxcityclub.org. As always, City Club will be live tweeting at this event. You can follow or mention us at PDXCityClub, or be sure to use the hashtag CityClub in your own tweets. We will be having a Q&A session with the panel at the end of today's program. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your questions. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards that are located in the middle of your table and write your questions on them during the forum. We'll collect them prior to the start of the question and answer period. And now, our program. The tragic incidents at Sandy Hook Elementary School and our very own Clackamas Town Center have once again moved the debate about gun control to the forefront of legislative agendas across the country. Proposals in the Oregon State Legislature include improvements to our mental health system, stricter laws on background checks, and bans on high-capacity magazines and semi-automatic weapons. More than half of Oregonians own a gun, and any change will require compromise. Penny Okamoto began working in the gun violence prevention movement in 1999 when she volunteered with the Million Mom March. She chose to work in gun violence prevention when she learned that money from the gun lobby was directly responsible for gun violence in the United States. Penny became the executive director of Ceasefire, Oregon in 2009, and since then has worked to strengthen gun laws in Oregon and educate the public about gun laws and gun violence. Kevin Starrett first moved to Oregon in 1991 and worked as a Northwest representative for the Gun Owners of America. Kevin founded the Oregon Firearms Federation in 1998. As executive director, he also founded Oregon Firearms Education Foundation and the Oregon Firearms Political Action Committee. Jack Roberts, our moderator, served as State Labor Commissioner from 1995 to 2003. In his current role as executive director for Lane Metro Partnership, Jack provides the leadership necessary for economic development efforts throughout Lane County. As director of this organization, his primary focus is on fostering business investment through recruitment, retention, and expansion. And without further ado, please help me welcome today's moderator and our speakers.
Well, we're having a great program today, so we want to just get started with it. We're going to start with opening statements from each of them. Then we'll go to questions, which we'll be sitting over here for. The questions will give each of them 2 minutes to respond, and then 1 minute to respond to what the others say. I have the opportunity to ask some follow-up questions, but we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can, so we'll do that. Then we'll have the audience questions later. So we flipped a coin earlier, and so Penny's going to start.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick, and thank you, Mr. Roberts. My thanks to all of you for joining us today, and to City Club for inviting Ceasefire Oregon to take part in this debate. Ceasefire Oregon works to reduce gun violence. We are not opposed to responsible gun ownership, and we believe that everyone has the right to live free from gun violence. Gun violence in this country is a serious public health problem. In 2012 alone, more than 11,000 people were victims of firearm homicides. That's an increase of 26% since 2008. Now, we all know that many of the shootings, the suicides, and the appalling mass murders could have been prevented. And what can be done to stem the bloodshed? Gun owners know there are many things they can do. They can become trained, and they are often trained, in how to safely handle a weapon. They ask the Oregon State Police to run a background check before selling a weapon. They store their guns unloaded and locked, with the ammunition stored and locked separately. Parents can prevent a tragedy. Ceasefire Oregon promotes a campaign called ASK, Asking Saves Kids. Before sending your child or grandchild to someone else's home, ask if there's a gun in the home. And ask that gun, if there's a gun, that it be kept unloaded and locked up while your child is there. The Centers for Disease Control has found that if a gun is in the home, the risk of someone in your family dying in a firearm incident is 300% greater than if there is no gun in the home. Part of Ceasefire Oregon's mission is to share important information like this with Oregonians. Unfortunately, however, it is still too easy for guns to fall into the wrong hands, and that's why we need better gun laws. Oregon's lucky to have determined and courageous politicians who are stepping up, sponsoring good legislation, and saying yes to gun law reform. There are several bills right now in the Oregon legislature that deserve your support. These bills include a universal background check on all gun sales, and a bill that would allow school districts to decide whether to allow guns in schools. And you can learn more at ceasefireoregon.org. There isn't just one solution to gun violence, there are many solutions to gun violence. But as E.J. Dionne has said, it's amazing what can happen when political fear gives way to fierce determination. And Oregonians have never been more determined to stop gun violence than we are now. Please join us. Thank you.
I want to thank you for this invitation, this opportunity to talk to you. You know, in this battle, very often it stops being a battle of ideology and becomes more of a battle of terminology. So instead of actually arguing about whether or not Americans have a right to have firearms for self-defense, we, as supporters of gun rights, find ourselves battling a war of cliches. Instead of discussing whether a person has a fundamental natural right to protect himself and others, we rename things, we invent things, and we try to create fear by catchphrase. The opponents of gun rights virtually always say they don't want to take away people's Second Amendment rights. They just want, quote, reasonable regulations. They're not after your hunting rifle, just assault weapons. They don't want to take self-defense guns away. They just want to get weapons of war off the streets. They say they support the Second Amendment. They just want to ban guns that have no purpose but to kill people as quickly as possible. But of course, those are exactly the firearms that are specifically protected by the Second Amendment. And here's the problem. Many of these terms only mean what the anti-gunners decide they mean. An assault weapon is whatever Mitch Greenlick says it is. It has no technical meaning. If you only want to ban assault weapons, then everything becomes an assault weapon. Of course, the same guns are called personal defense weapons when the state buys them. Occasionally, someone will take the position that no American has the right to own any gun of any kind, except, of course, the police. That's a scary idea, and it's one that I think defies reason, but it's intellectually consistent. What's not consistent is to say we're not looking to take anyone's guns away and then attempt to do just that. Over and over, we're reassured by everyone from our president right down to Oregon legislators that they're, quote, not after Americans' guns. And then they introduce legislation like House Bill 3200, which not only bans almost all modern firearms, but calls for warrantless searches of people's homes by the police. It outlaws things like, quote, protruding grips and barrel shrouds, which most of the proponents of these bills can't even define. But even as draconian and unconstitutional as that bill is, it isn't even internally consistent. Okay, the short version of this is that we believe that it's time for everyone to just tell the truth of where they stand and be more honest about what their position is. And we believe the position of groups like Ceasefire Oregon, who asked for 3,200, really don't want to protect anyone's gun rights.
All right, now we'll start with the question and answer period. And following the, and we're going to reverse order back and forth from where we followed before. So this first question will be to Kevin. In 2 court cases, District of Columbia versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago, the United States Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment does establish an individual right to gun ownership, but also provided that it's not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose, and that certain restrictions on that right therefore can be imposed by the government. Do you agree with this interpretation, and do you believe that it does or does not support the constitutionality of limitations such as the ban on assault weapons or high-capacity magazines?
No, I don't agree with the interpretation, and I think it's interesting when you look at a previous interpretation, Miller versus U.S., the Supreme Court said in no uncertain terms that the only firearms that are protected by the Constitution for individual use are military-style firearms. And yes, the Supreme Court is a place from which there is no appeal, but I believe that the wording of the Second Amendment is not ambiguous. And when it says shall not be infringed, that's what it means. I also believe that in the Heller case, no note was taken of the Miller case, which they seem to quite clearly contradict each other.
Penny?
Thank you very much. Yes, actually, I do agree with the right that, actually I have it right here, the right to bear arms is, quote, not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, and for whatever purpose, end quote. That is from Heller 554 U.S., United States. There is no constitutional right to own an assault weapon. The Second Amendment does provide an individual right to have a handgun in this home for self-defense, but not a right to have an assault weapon. And even from 1789 to 2008, the Second Amendment did not actually recognize an individual right to own a firearm. It wasn't until Heller in 2008 that there was a right in the home for protection. The Supreme Court said it was not a personal right at that time, but a right to state right for the state to have a militia. So it wasn't really until 2008 that Supreme Court decided, yes, you can have a gun in your home for self-defense, but they did put limitations on that right.
Kevin, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that once again, nobody can define what a, quote, assault weapon is. It's a unicorn, it's a Sasquatch, and the definition changes depending on who you ask what an assault weapon is. And as far as the Constitution not protecting it, as I said, if you look at the case of Miller, they said quite clearly that you have no right to a gun that is not a military gun.
Mr. Starrett, you might not know what an assault weapon is, but I do, and General William McChrystal does. General McChrystal had said that he would like to have assault weapons banned. So yes, he knows what it is. Ronald Reagan in 1994, in a letter to the United States House of Representatives, also said that he wanted a ban on assault weapons. So yes, I think Ronald Reagan did. And I know that our listeners cannot see this, but I have a picture of a Colt AR-15 assault rifle right here. So yes, we do know what an assault weapon is. And I'll tell you something else. The people at Clackamas Town Center and the people in Newtown, Connecticut, they know what an assault weapon is. So let's not play games here. We know what we're talking about. We know what needs to be banned.
One follow-up question I'd like to have to that subject for each of you is that in addition to the Second Amendment, we also have a provision in the Oregon Constitution, Article 1, Section 27, which provides that people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. I'd just like to ask briefly each of you whether you think that adds additional restrictions on the right of the Oregon Legislature to legislate guns, and particularly things like assault weapons and the high-capacity magazines, or is this simply a repetition of what the United States Constitution says? Kevin?
I do believe it adds some protections, but once again, I think that if you look at the history of the term assault weapon over the time it's been made popular. You know, we know what an assault rifle is, but everybody's definition from Dianne Feinstein to Mitch Greenlick's change. If it has a pistol grip, it's, quote, an assault weapon. You know, my pistol has a pistol grip. Is that an assault weapon? But other things like a barrel shroud or a folding stock or a forward grip, these are cosmetic features that make no difference whatsoever. I mean, we have the Feinstein bill bans one Ruger Mini 14 rifle and allows the other one, and the only difference is what color they are. So as a firearms instructor for 20 years, I think I might have a little bit more knowledge about what a different kind of firearm is than Penny does.
Penny?
Okay, you were actually referring to,
The Oregon Constitution.
right, the Oregon Constitution, right? Right, okay, we weren't talking about what Mr. Starrett decides a firearm is going to be. We're talking about the Oregon Constitution. There's one question I have in there, and that I know that there's 166.170 in the Oregon in the Oregon law that actually is the preemption bill. And this basically states that cities, counties actually cannot make their own laws regarding storage, sale, et cetera, of firearms, except for very small cases, like perhaps, for example, the city of Portland has a case where they regulate carrying loaded firearms. So really, I think that's, I'm running out of time here, but I think really that's kind of the only difference that we have there.
Thank you. We'll go to the second question now. This time we'll start with Penny. The current focus on new gun laws, as Pat said in his introduction, is primarily response to mass shootings, and in particular, the horrific shooting at Newtown, Connecticut, and locally, the shooting at Clackamas Town Center. Can you name any laws that might conceivably pass constitutional muster that might have prevented either of those shootings?
Right, absolutely. First of all, if we had required and mandated storage of weapons, then the shooter at the Clackamas Town Center might actually not have got a hold of that assault rifle and taken it to the Clackamas Town Center. Same thing with Adam Lanza's mother. If she had kept her weapons securely stored and away from her son, maybe he would not have taken those weapons to school that day. So right there, safe storage alone would have helped. If we do more to help people who have mental illness, that would have helped. If we ban assault weapons, then we don't have to worry so much about someone coming in with a 100-round magazine, a 30-round magazine, a 20-round magazine. So yes, limiting the size of magazines can actually help decrease gun deaths. So yes, there are definitely things that we can do.
Kevin?
There's 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has reported on how the Connecticut mother stored her firearms. I have seen no reports of how that was done. And even though Congressman DeFazio put out a letter saying that was terrible how she did that, his office admitted that they didn't know. The second thing is this, is that it seems odd to me that we would say we're going to limit magazine capacity to 10 rounds to affect the behavior of mass killers. Like, what we want to do is inconvenience them. We're going to regulate mass killing. If we really want to affect how mass killers behave, shouldn't we limit them to no rounds? But on one other point, you know, the safe storage issue is important, and responsible gun owners store their guns safely. But there is no possible way to guarantee that those guns won't be accessed. I have a good friend who's here today who had one of the most expensive safes I've ever seen, and that safe was completely pried open. There was nothing more he could have done to protect those guns. So while it's a good and responsible thing to do it, it does not prevent crazy people or criminal people bent on carnage from engaging in that kind of behavior.
Penny, your response?
First of all, I'd like to address the high-capacity magazine issue. In the state of Oregon, if people are hunting birds, they get 3 bullets at a time, okay? 3 bullets at a time. If you're hunting large game, you get 5 bullets at a time. If you're going after humans, you get unlimited numbers. You can go after 100 rounds, like the Aurora shooter did. That is obscene. And here we are on our knees to the gun lobby, saying, can we please just be shot at with just 10 rounds, 10 bullets at once? So yeah, I do think that is obscene. But we're realists, and we know that if we don't put in a number like that, nothing's gonna happen. Because the gun lobby, by God, they want their money, don't they? They want their money. They don't care what it costs. They don't care how many lives they cost. So, and as far as safe storage is concerned, yes, safe storage does work. and it would have saved many lives in Newtown, in Thurston, and in Clackamas Town Center.
Kevin.
You know, over and over, I've heard Penny discuss this idea that if you're hunting humans, you get an unlimited amount of rounds. Now, let's be realistic, folks. Hunting humans is not something that is legal or can be regulated. And so to suggest that what we want to do is reduce the carnage to 10 people, instead of finding reasonable ways to reduce that carnage to 0 people, I think is really disingenuous. The fact is that to say you're allowed to hunt humans with an unlimited amount of rounds suggests that you're allowed to hunt humans, and that's absurd.
Now I'll go to the third question. And Kevin, this time we'll start with you. Some people have suggested that a universal background check, to be effective, would require a national firearm registry in order to track gun sales. Do you agree with this? And, whether you agree or not, do you think that's something that you believe would be A, constitutional, and B, appropriate?
I do believe that you can't have an effective background check if you're not tracking firearms. If I own 5 firearms and I choose to sell one privately, if you don't have a serial number or a way to follow that gun, it's not going to be realistic that the background check system is going to do anything. But I will tell you this, the suggestion that we have a universal background check is something that you should think very carefully about, because currently we have background checks for guns that are purchased from any dealer or anybody who's selling it at a gun show. And I hear from people every single day who've been denied or delayed purchases because the background check system simply doesn't work. And whether we like it or not, as much as we'd love to live in the fantasy world that this is going to make a difference, crazy people and criminals do not subject themselves to background checks. So bad people aren't deterred, but every day good people are deterred because they've been asked to request permission from the state for something that should be a fundamental right, and they have a prior restraint on their rights, and in many cases these people are denied or delayed their rights, while people who want to go shoot up shopping centers don't submit themselves to background checks. Now, I think we'd all agree that mass murderers should subject themselves to background checks before they go on a killing spree, but I don't think that's going to happen, so I don't think it's helpful or appropriate.
Penny?
We do have studies that show that, that background checks, we do have studies that show that background checks do work. People will not go and submit to background check if they know that they are a felon or they're going to be prohibited in another way. And as far as people being inconvenienced, more than 98% of all the background checks that go through the NICS system are actually approved within minutes. So no, this is not a huge problem. The other thing too that Mr. Starrett fails to tell you is how quickly someone can actually access and possess a weapon after purchase, even if that background check cannot be determined. It's a matter of days. They get their gun anyway. So yes, we do need to have background checks for all gun sales. 40% of gun sales do not go through a background check. This is how criminals are getting their guns very easily. Why do we need to make it easier? I mean, what are we supposed to do, just put the gun right into their hands? That's basically what we're doing. We need background checks. We know background checks work.
Kevin, your response?
Yeah, I totally agree with Penny. People who are not going to be able to pass a background check don't subject themselves to background checks. That's the lunacy of it all. I also agree with something else that Penny said recently at a Washington County forum, where she said that no gun zones don't work because people don't pay any attention to those signs if they're planning on committing crimes. And so while you can say that a background check is really an important thing, the people who subject themselves to it are the people who can pass it. And the people who can't pass it, even if they try to pass it and fail, face no liability. No one comes out and arrests them for failing to pass the background check. But if you're a woman alone in a rural part of the state and you don't have any means of protecting yourself, and you are not one of those people who gets an instant check and you're waiting 2, 3, 4 months, which is what I hear from people all the time, you might have a very different outlook on how beneficial that prior restraint might be.
Penny?
If they're waiting 2, 3, 4 months, then something is wrong, because that's actually not Oregon law. In addition to needing the background checks, we also need to make sure that we've got enough agents who can go in and make sure that the federally licensed firearms dealers are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and are actually making those background checks. So we do need someone to head up the ATF federally, and we need funding for these agents to check on these gun sellers. Because we know that 60% of crime guns can be traced back to 1.2% of gun dealers. So first of all, yes, we need to crack down on federally licensed firearm dealers and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. As I said, only 1.2% aren't, but that is the source for 60% of the gun crimes. Sorry. All right, go.
One quick follow-up for each of you, a minute. One of the things that the Obama administration and also a lot of gun right advocates have been suggesting is that there should be more stringent prosecution of people who do the background checks and find out that they have misrepresented either their criminal history or some other factor in it, and they should be prosecuted. Is that a helpful approach, or does that add to safety at all, Kevin?
I think it would add to safety if people who are not supposed to have firearms are found to be attempting to get them, but I believe it was the Obama administration themselves who recently admitted that they practically never do anything about those people. So if a person who's prevented legally from having a firearm, in those rare cases where they subject themselves to a background check and they're denied, if there's no prosecution, then all they have to do is get a firearm from someplace else. Background checks don't prevent people from getting guns. They prevent people from getting guns in that place at that time. And so I think we're living in a fantasy world if we think any of these things are going to, I mean, we can go as close as Mexico where virtually everything is banned for everyone. And there's people down there with tanks. So another added restraint on your rights for people who haven't done anything wrong, I just don't believe it's justified.
Penny.
For example, in Virginia, when the state of Virginia said that they were going to have background checks, over the years they prevented 12,000 felons from getting weapons, and they prosecuted them. And the Obama administration, you've got to go through the state actually to do that prosecution. The state of Oregon would be the one doing the prosecution, not the Obama administration. And we also have to remember, this is such a common sense issue to have background checks for every gun sale that well over 90% of Americans support this bill. And 74% of NRA members, that's from a Frank Luntz poll, they support this bill. So we know this is just a common sense thing to do and people want it. And I will tell you, if this does not pass, people are going to have their eyes open to how much money is really being brought in through the legislative system. And that has got to stop. American lives are more important than gun profits.
Our next question, start with Penny. In Oregon, approximately 150,000 people have concealed handgun permits. Do you think this increases or reduces public safety? And what do you think of efforts to preclude those who have such licenses from nonetheless being able to bring those guns into specific places such as schools and government offices?
This actually brings up several different questions. Yes, we do have over 150,000 people in Oregon today with concealed handgun licenses. And to get a license, you have to take a course, you have to pay a fee, and you have to pass a background check. You don't even have to show that you can fire a gun. But right now there's a bill 769 that's in the legislature that will say that you have to have firearm range training to get a concealed handgun license. I completely 100% approve of this. We also talked about having guns in schools. No, Bill 347 would prohibit concealed handgun licenses in schools. And by the way, we aren't bringing this to the concealed handgun license people. It was brought to us. And this is how we have to respond. The Oregon state law states that, yes, concealed handgun license holders may have their weapons in schools. The schools are saying, no, thank you. We don't want this, or we want to be able to make the decision, not the NRA and not the Oregon Firearm Federation, on how best to run our school. And then finally, having concealed handgun licenses within the Capitol building. Now, I don't know if any of you have been to a Capitol building on Thursdays lately, but we've got a lot of armed men, mostly men, some women there, and they are only there to intimidate people. They say they're there because it's their right. I don't think so. You can show that you have a right to have a weapon without carrying an AR-15, which someone was showing me the other day. This is ridiculous. It's the Capitol building. It belongs to all of us. And Wayne LaPierre is not right. He once said that the guys with the guns make the rules. No, this is America. This is a democracy. The people make the rules, not the guys with the guns. So we need to ban concealed handgun license carry in the Capitol as well as in our schools.
Kevin?
I've heard Ginny Burdick also say this, that the Capitol building is for everybody. Apparently, it's not for gun owners, so it's not for everybody. And as far as being intimidated, different people are intimidated by different things. And there's all kinds of people who show up at the Capitol, whether they be public school employees, or they be union activists, or they be activists for illegal aliens, and their behavior could be considered intimidating by a lot of people. But the fact is that at the event where people did go into the Capitol, their building, with their firearms legally, the police reported no incidents. So what's the response of some in the legislature? There were no incidents, therefore we have to ban it. What about firearms in schools? Well, there have been no incidents, so we have to ban it. And I've got to wonder, the day of the Connecticut shooting, Ceasefire Oregon was down in the Capitol passing out flyers, and one of the demands on the flyers that we enact good laws like Connecticut has. Now, however this person acquired the means to kill those people in that school, the teachers there and the adults were forbidden from being able to protect themselves, all right? There was nothing to keep this shooter out. But I just wonder, in the last moments before that last teacher died, as she watched her children gunned down, if she said to herself, I'm so happy I don't have a gun because someone could get hurt.
Penny?
I can't believe you would mock a woman who has put her body over children and taken bullets for them, and you're mocking her. I'm sorry. Perhaps I simply don't understand what you're
I'm
getting
not
at.
mocking anyone. I feel very sorry for her.
This is my time. I don't understand how you could possibly say that. So as far as intimidation is concerned in the Capitol, there were people who did not go to the Capitol and will not go to the Capitol because they don't feel comfortable with all these people carrying guns who are not happy people. And I can show you, actually I don't even know if I can read it on the air because it's rather salacious, emails that legislatures have received. Threatening emails, nasty emails, intimidating emails. And as far as nothing's happened in schools, you know what? I'm not going to wait around for a shooting. Let's not wait for a shooting. Let's prevent one.
Kevin?
Well, I think it's interesting that Penny has the ability to psychoanalyze the people who showed up at those rallies. I didn't see any of them that weren't happy. They all seemed to be very happy to me. They all seemed to be very well behaved. And on both occasions when we left, the police remarked what a nice job everyone had done about cleaning up after themselves, which is something they rarely see when groups go down there. And if you say, I'm not going to wait for something to happen, well, things do happen all the time. Bad people do bad things. And in the case of what Ceasefire Oregon wants to do is guarantee that no one has the ability to respond. And to suggest that I was mocking a teacher who was gunned down because she was denied the right to protect herself and her babies is absurd.
Our next question, this one will start with Kevin. Although a recent study claims to show that there is a correlation between the strictness of gun laws and the level of gun violence by state, others point to the experience in major American cities as evidence to the contrary. For example, Chicago has one of the nation's highest gun homicide rates, despite laws banning assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and even gun stores. Portland, on the other hand, has few gun control laws and yet has a much lower gun homicide rate. Do you believe that social, cultural, and economic factors have a greater influence on the level of gun violence than gun control laws?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I think it's self-evident. If you go to places like Chicago or many other places in this country, firearms ownership is, for all intents and purposes, even Washington, D.C., which supposedly changed its laws, but practically hasn't changed their laws, that hasn't had an effect on reducing crime. It is certainly a social and cultural issue. And if you go to inner city places where gang members are shooting each other all the time, that is not happening simply because guns exist, because you can go and become part of my gun culture and go to my gun club when hunter safety is going on, and there are 100 young people walking around with firearms. and no one's being shot. Why? Because they have families, and because they have fathers, and because they have responsible people around them who train them to do the right thing. The presence or absence of guns isn't affecting these people's behavior. It's other cultural influences and other cultural problems that are not going to be addressed by writing more laws to restrict your rights.
Penny?
When you specifically talk about Chicago, one of the things that people might not know about Chicago is Chicago's entirely Cook County. And then there are the surrounding counties. And in Chicago, one side of the street, you're in Chicago, you cross to the next side of the street, you're gonna be in a different county. Maybe you're gonna be in DuPage County, Lake County. Those counties actually have different gun laws than Cook County, which is Chicago. So it's pretty easy hop to just, get on the metro and go over to these other counties and buy your weapons there. That's one of the big problems that Chicago's facing. They are also facing huge problems of poverty in Chicago. And we're facing it all around the nation. Anytime that we've got economic difficulties like we've been through with this Great Recession, crime goes up. People become desperate, crime goes up. So yes, we do have that. We do know that when you reduce the number of guns, you reduce the number of gun crimes. It's logical, it makes sense. And then finally, in Oregon, of course, we do have issues, like I said, with the economy. But in Oregon, the biggest problem that we have with gun death is suicide. Year in, year out, it's around 75 to 85% of all gun deaths are suicides here in Oregon. And those are things that we can reach as well. We can deal with mental health issues, we can deal with waiting periods. We've got things that we can do to help prevent suicides here.
Kevin, your response?
Well, to suggest that you can walk across the street in a place and get a gun is an indication of why there's more gun crime there would make you have to wonder why there's not more gun crime in the places where you can get the guns. I mean, it's not hard for a person to legally buy a firearm in Portland or in most of Oregon. So if that's true and the availability of the gun is the issue, why are the problems in places where whether or not you practically can get your hands on a gun or not, it's illegal? Why are so many people shooting each other there? And my position is that even if you're totally fearful of guns, things that are not self-animated, you have to understand that it's people's behavior, and why is it a problem in some inner cities and not a problem in rural places where every house has a gun and you can go into a gun store and buy a gun? The gun is not the problem.
Penny?
Again, studies have shown, I'll say this one more time because facts do matter, that increased ownership of guns has an increased rate of gun death. Now, when you're specifically talking about Chicago, it is pretty easy to go from one county to another county to get your guns. You're going to have your people who are doing a lot of crime or gangs are going to be in Chicago, but they're also going to be in other places like Joliet and Aurora, Illinois. They have gangs there too, and they have gun violence there as well. They don't obviously have the number of people that Chicago has, but it does exist there as well. So yes, that is one of the big problems in Chicago, is that these laws that they have created are just for Cook County, not for the entire state.
Now we have time for one last question before we go to your closing statements. And this, after having now listened to some of the fundamental differences between the Oregon Firearms Association and or Federation and the Ceasefire Oregon on gun control, I'm wondering whether each of you can identify areas of common agreement or at least common interest in regard to the broader issues of gun violence or gun safety. Penny?
I think since over 90% of Americans, and including, like I said before, 74% of NRA members want universal background checks, absolutely. I think we can absolutely say that we want to have universal background checks. Also, I think we can agree on having a requirement for firearm range training when people have a concealed handgun license. People always brag, people with a CHL, concealed handgun license, are the best of the best. So I'm sure that they would want the training that goes with that. So yes, I do think that we can agree on that. I think there are a lot of other things that we can agree on. We can agree on education, storage. Safe storage is really important. I don't think it's controversial at all. Also, the Ask campaign, Asking Saves Kids, teaching kids about guns. If you see a gun, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. These are all important things that can reduce gun death that I think anyone can agree on.
Kevin?
I certainly think that educating our children about firearms is an excellent idea. I know I've done it with my children their whole lives. I didn't teach them fear of firearms. I taught them how to properly respond to dealing with a firearm. My 13-year-old is a nationally certified firearms instructor. I feel totally comfortable having guns in his hands. But the rest of the restraints that Penny suggests, no, there's no common ground there. The suggestions that 75% of people, as Burdick has said, I've spoken to thousands of gun owners, they all agree with me. I can't seem to find any of them. All of the things that we're told NRA members support, and I'm not an NRA member, it seems odd that if NRA members don't support the policies of the NRA, why they added 300,000 members in the last 2 months. So I would like to see every effort made to get people help if they have mental health issues, at the same time recognizing that there's a very, very serious civil liberty here because most people who have mental health problems are not dangerous or violent. And if we take the position that we're just going to lock everybody up all the time, now we're going in a direction I think most people would be afraid of.
Penny, a response?
Right. I understand that the Oregon Firearms Federation bills themselves as Oregon's only no-compromise gun lobby. It's my way or the highway. You know what? That's just not acceptable. That's not how communities, states, countries work. There are a lot of things that we can do that have common ground that are going to save people's lives. It's being reasonable. We're not saying ban all guns. We are for responsible gun ownership, and no, an assault weapon is not part of responsible gun ownership. Everything that we have, every bill that we have done, everything we have stated is well within constitutional rights. It's been done before. It's been done in other states. We've already had a 1994 ban on assault weapons that was proven to be constitutional. So I stand by everything that I've said, and that yes, we are willing to work. If you've got problems with the assault weapons ban, let's talk about it. You don't like the safe storage requirement, let's talk about it.
Kevin?
Well, you know, the way the system works is that people go to legislators and make their voices heard. And if someone is upset because people who support gun rights are making their voices heard, and as a result, the changes that they want, the restrictions they want, the reductions on liberties they want are not happening, it's not because, you know, I can tell you my gun lobby doesn't get any money from gun manufacturers, it's people. It's a lot of people who are angry and tired that people are trying to strip them of their rights and are responding, and they're responding through the system. And if you have a problem with that, well, I'm sorry, but that's the way it really does work. You know, get your people activated, and we get our people activated, and it's all done completely legitimately and politically.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the closing statements, and then we will take questions from the audience. And the closing statements will be given from the podium, and we'll go in the same order in which the opening statement. So Penny, you're first.
Again, my thanks to City Club and to all of you for being here today. Special thanks to Mr. Roberts for moderating, and to our OPB listeners for tuning in. Many of you are probably familiar with Bill Moyers. After Newtown, Mr. Moyers spoke out with a powerful essay entitled, "Remember the Victims, Reject the Violence." And here's part of that essay. Quote, "This spilling of innocent blood, this bleeding of democracy's soul, we're losing faith in ourselves, acting as subjects, not citizens, no longer believing that it is in our power to do the right thing. The gun industry says, don't tread on us. Get off our well-armed backs. There's nothing you can do. But of course there is," end quote. And together we will do the right thing by reducing gun violence. The winds of change are in the air. Legal battles are being won across the nation. And citizens, both Republicans and Democrats, gun owners are taking to end gun violence. Last month in Chicago, Robin Kelly, a candidate who supports stronger gun laws, easily won over a candidate with an A rating from the NRA. A bipartisan bill to crack down on straw purchases and illegal gun trafficking is making its way through the U.S. Senate. And here in Oregon, New groups have sprung up with people who want to be involved in this work to reduce gun violence. They are tired of the NRA and the gun lobbies making money off the deaths of their loved ones. This legislative session, our elected officials are considering bills that the majority of Oregonians can support. Never before have there been so many people so determined to act, and we are acting. We're acting for our families, our communities, and our state. We're acting those who were shot and those who died at Clackamas Town Center. We're acting for the brave teachers at Sandy Hook Elementary School who stood in the line of fire to save those children's lives. Because the Newtown children are our children. We're acting to protect lives, not gun lobby profits. And we need your help to prevent gun violence. Please help us. Please visit our website, ceasefireoregon.org. Get involved. Talk to your legislators. Thank you very much for your time.
You know, in my gun safes at home, there are maybe 4 or 5 firearms that Ceasefire Oregon would like to ban. They're sitting in my safe. They're hurting no one. Never have hurt anyone, never will hurt anyone. But if we accept their position that these are killing machines, that they have no place in the street, that they're self-animated, ask yourself why in House Bill 3200, a bill that Ceasefire Oregon requested and several legislators sponsored, it lets me keep one of those firearms. Lets me keep one. The rest I have to transfer out of state or turn over to the police. They're so deadly that I have to give them to someone in Idaho, okay? I'm allowed to keep one of those guns, and I'm allowed to keep 3 magazines. Magazines are responsible for all these high-profile killings. If they're so deadly, if they're so dangerous, why am I allowed to keep one of them? I mean, why am I allowed to keep 3 magazines and one rifle? If it's a deadly killing machine, let's go after all of them. The fact is, they wrote a bill that banned virtually everything, that redefined what most firearms are. One of the sponsors has already asked to have his name taken off of it. The chief sponsor's been backing off of it like crazy because it is so extreme that even liberal Democrats in the House and Senate have said, we want nothing to do with this. A firearm is deadly in the hands of a bad person, and it makes no difference if you call it a hunting rifle or a mythical assault weapon or anything else. Bad people do bad things, and good people's guns in their closets, protected by responsible behavior, do nothing to anyone. To strip people of their rights to have these, or to have most of them, really just makes no sense to me. Thank you.
Now, before we start with the questions from the audience, how about a round of applause for both our speakers here who gave us a very civil and thoughtful debate. Now, I see a lot of you already ahead of me. I'm supposed to remind you of the rules here. Questions will be over at the microphone, and we're asking for people who only are City Club members, Anyone can join, and they'll be glad to let you join up now before you ask your question if you're not a member. We also ask that you remember that this is questions from the audience, not speeches from the audience, so we're asking people to get their question in 30 seconds. So we'll start here.
Roger Meyer, country doctor. I have 2 questions that I ask people in my practice, and the one is, how many have guns or weapons in their place, their car, their boat? And our second question, are they secure? And I'd like to know how many of the audience have a weapon in their home, and how many are secure? Good, great, thank you.
Dave Graff, City Club member. I'm curious, we have previously had what they call an assault weapons ban, although what they're calling assault weapons is really, it's a .223. It's slightly bigger than the target guns that we used to use when I was a kid. It's not big enough to kill a deer. But this congressionally passed assault weapons ban, magazine ban, lasted 10 years. Every year there were multiple studies done, including by the Brady Center, which all concluded that there was no evidence that it made any difference at all. Why are we still talking about it instead of looking for something else? And this is primarily for you, Jenny.
I'm very happy to answer that question. Actually, we know that in the state of Virginia, Actually, the number of assault weapons share actually decreased by 22% during the assault weapons ban. So we know that these bans work. One of the problems with the ban was that all assault weapons were grandfathered in. So basically, what you're doing with any type of ban, it's kind of like a spigot. You've got a spigot with water flowing. In this case, it's a spigot with assault weapons flowing. You've got to stop that. You've got to turn off that main water supply. But once you have that main water supply off, you still are flooded with water, or in this case, assault weapons. So yes, even after an assault weapons ban, we are still going to have to deal with people who decide to use an assault weapon to kill someone.
Kevin, would you like to respond to that as well?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. You can ban everything you want, and there will still be people finding ways to kill each other. And so what you do is have no effect on people who want to commit crimes, but you take away the rights from people who may have used those firearms to defend themselves. And ultimately, I do not feel like telling anybody that they have a right to defend themselves this much. And I think that in the bills we've seen locally, if the problem is that firearms are grandfathered in, why write a bill that grandfathers in the very firearms you're trying to ban?
And let me just say before we do this, you're welcome to direct your question permanently to one person. We will give the other one a chance to respond, and we're doing well in terms of time, so I think we can do that.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What?
Oh, you can direct your question to one of them if you want to. We will give the other person a chance to respond, however.
Okay, thank you. I'm Johnny Engelhardt. My question is to either one of you. I'm not clear on well, as a Vietnam vet that I took life, and now as a Vietnam vet with a disabled life that have police come to my door when I need help with their hand on their gun. I would like to know, in Oregon, do we ask the question, other than for self-defense, do we ask the question, for what purpose is this? A deeper kind of character question. What's this purpose for this person having the gun? Thank you.
Which of you wants to handle that first?
Are you talking about when someone obtains a concealed handgun license?
Yes, for the process to get us concealed handgun license. I think it's a very dangerous situation, which you told me 150,000. That's way over the top.
Right, Oregon actually is a shall issue state. So as far as I know, those questions aren't asked. I do believe a sheriff has some leeway if that sheriff happens to have good evidence that a person intends to do something illegal with that weapon. But as far as I know, no, there's no question like that that's asked.
Kevin, say you understand.
I'm not sure I understand the question. If the question was, what reasons do you need to have other than self-defense to get a concealed handgun license, I don't know what other reason you would need.
Yes, sir.
Muriel Lezak, City Club member. It's my experience, and I believe it's general as well, at least in Oregon, most of the killings have been done by people who, first of all, would pass background checks, and second of all, are people who, until the time of the killing, would be considered to be good people by themselves and by the community. But what happened would be chance of a loaded gun at a time when their emotions are running high, and sometimes they've been on meth or alcohol, something like that. So a background check is not going to identify these people. Can you comment on what we do? This is most of the killings in Oregon and probably throughout the country. These are not assault weapon killings.
Which of you wants to start on this?
Well, I'll start. I have never seen any study or evidence that indicates that most killings are done by people who have absolutely no history of violence. I find that a little hard to believe, but I do completely agree with the statement that most killings are not done with what is being mistakenly called assault weapons. Last year in this country, 651 people were killed with rifles. Far, far more than that were killed with fists and feet and knives. So to address the first part, I'm just not sure I agree with it, and to address the second part, I do agree with it, that the killings done by the guns that are attempted to be banned in House Bill 3200 are responsible for a tiny fraction of the already too many deaths in this country.
Even in 1993, before funding for research was cut off by the Congress, Kellerman had done a study that showed basically that if you have a weapon in the home, you're 300 times more likely to use it. There's been another study done as well by Dr. Wintemute from UC Davis. So we do know that just having a weapon in the home will increase the likelihood that someone in that home will be shot. And it's very true. A lot of people, they'll buy a weapon, they'll pass the background check. A few years go by, they might not even use the weapon. Circumstances change, things happen, and things take a murderous turn. And one of the big problems that we have with that is actually domestic violence, unfortunately. So that is a true fact. And again, having a gun in the home is going to increase your chance of being shot. It's a good question. Thank you.
You've both talked.
Excuse me, just one second. I just want to respond to that. Many of these studies include, they say that the chances of being shot in your home go way up when there's a gun there. Now, obviously, you cannot be shot in your home if there's a gun not there. But many of these studies include numbers of people who were shot in their homes by people who broke into their homes or attacked them in their homes and brought guns. And those people now counted amongst the people that they had guns in their homes because an attacker came in with a gun. You can't be shot in a place where there's no gun. So I think those statistics are largely meaningless.
Penny?
Again, the studies by Wintemute and Keller, and I'd be happy to provide them to Mr. Starrett if he hasn't read that, actually refers to the original gun that was purchased, not a gun that's brought in by a criminal.
By all means, provide those to me.
Okay, you guys can settle that later. Go ahead.
I'm Jean Magmer, and I'm a City Club member. And you've talked a lot about banning assault rifles and ammunition. But it seems to me that we have to have a license to drive a car. And if I have a concealed weapon, I've got to have a license for that. So what's the big deal, both of you, about having a license to have a firearm, having that registered, and having to have a background check to get it? It seems to me that that part of it's a no-brainer. But what do you guys, I think, can you both agree on that?
You need no license to own a car in this state. You don't need to register a car in this state unless you choose to operate it on public property. I can have a backyard full of cars, and I don't need permission from the state to do either one. Registration of cars has not made us any safer on the roads. Registration is a system of generating revenue for the state. And so the correlation between firearms and guns, between guns and cars, is really quite a stretch. If it's true that I don't need the state's permission to have a car on my property, why should I ask the state's permission to have a gun in my safe?
This is an excellent question, and yes, licensing will help. One of the things that we know is that when we take a look at from a public health point of view, for the ways in which people die, whether we're talking about fires, drownings, car crashes, we take a look at what happened, we study that, and we implement safety features so we can save lives. And licensing for cars has been one of the ways to do that. You have to have a certain amount of education to be able to license a car. This isn't all about state control and things like that. This is about helping people stay alive. Now, we know that car crashes have decreased because of education and because of regulation about cars. Many of you were around before they were airbags or before they were even seat belts. We know those save lives, and yes, that was mandated by law. So we know that these types of efforts, education, legislation, can help save lives. And it's true, it has decreased in drownings, fires, and car crashes. And one more thing, in 2009, more Oregonians died from gunfire than from car crashes. The number of people dying in car crashes is decreasing because of the public health measures that are put in place. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers did something very similar. Back in the 70s, and many of you probably remember, people would drive drunk and they'd crash and then someone would die. Oh, that's terrible, it's a horrible thing. Yes, of course it's a horrible thing. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers did something about it. And they did it without banning automobiles or without banning alcohol. We all remember the phrase, friends don't let friends drive drunk. Really stuck into our heads. Oh yeah, we can't do that. Stricter laws about drunk driving, even a federal law on drunk driving. All of that helped to reduce drunk driving deaths. And we all know that it did not it did not eliminate drunk driving deaths, but it did reduce them.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time for the question period, and if you want to stick around, I'm sure they'll be glad to answer your question later, but I'll turn it back now to Pat.
Thank you all. We've run out of time, as you mentioned, and we'll have to stop for the day. Please join us next week for Think Out Loud with Governor Kitzhaber. And as we close today, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Penny Okamoto, Kevin Starrett, and our moderator, Jack Roberts. We are adjourned.